The What's Neat This Week video podcast is supported by enthusiastic model railroaders just like you. Additional support is provided by Athearn Trains. Check out all their new monthly announcements at athearn.com. And by Bachmann Trains. Now that's the way to run a railroad. Check out their website at bachmanntrains.com. Further support is provided by the NCE Corporation, the power of DCC. Visit their website at ncedcc.com. And thank you for supporting the What's Neat This Week podcast. This is the What's Neat This Week show podcast, 70.5 tonight, special edition on March 30th, 2019. And tonight I've got with me some very special guests with some absolutely extraordinary, beautiful locomotives being shown for the very first time on What's Neat This Week. These are SD90 MACs from Athearn Trains. Chris, they are SD90
MAC H Phase 2.
Okay, as I didn't hand it off to Matt, but Matt, you knew so much about these, and I'm going to let Chris and you guys talk about this.
Well, you know, just going through a couple questions here because, you know, I wanted to get in Matt's head, and this might be kind of a scary place.
It's dark in here.
So let me ask you, why the SD90 MAC?
Honestly, I sort of got interested in these mechanically. I'm sort of a horsepower mechanical dork.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, whenever you think about stuff, DD35s, DDA40Xs, you know, twin engines, but they're already existing prime movers, you know, 645s, etc. And then, of course, you know, you have your turbine locomotives up to 8,500 horsepower,
right,
rated up to 8,500 horsepower. Of course, on the road, they were probably a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But then, you know, coming across the SD90 MAC,
yeah.
You know, EMD developed a 6,000 horsepower prime mover.
Yeah.
After the 5,000 horsepower 20-cylinder 710 that is in the SD80 MAC.
Right.
And, oh, wow, that's interesting. That's cool. What are those about?
Uh-huh.
And so, you know, just sort of digging into these things, let's make them.
Right.
And so a lot of people may or may not know that Athearn acquired the rail power tooling many years ago. And a couple, 3-4 years ago coming up now, we were having an internal R&D discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, hey, let's get another model out and let's see if we can sort of get it out kind of quick and everything like that. And, oh, look, rail power had an SD90 MAC.
Yep.
So let's see what that's about. And so, you know, did a little bit of research. Let's try to polish this thing up, see what we can do with it. And so we talked to the factory where the molds are stored and everything like that, and let's load it up and let's shoot it and see how it does.
Yeah.
Well, they shot it, and it came out as a big flat pancake with a couple of 90 MAC-shaped chunks in it. So, okay.
It did.
That's no good.
Yeah.
So, because honestly, in thinking about that, this version was not even accommodated for. We were only going to worry about the SD90 MAC and the 90 MAC H Phase 1 because at some time in the history of the tooling, they had made an insert for the tapered hood section to get the Phase 1, which was the first version with the 6,000 horsepower prime mover. What some people may or may not know is EMD promised a 6,000 horsepower locomotive.
Yeah.
The 265H four-stroke prime mover from EMD, which was rated for the 6,000 horsepower, had teething issues. And so EMD, having already taken orders, was trying to keep their promise to the railroads that had placed orders for these things and said, well, we have the 710 16-cylinder prime mover rated for 4,300 horsepower. It's good. We're going to follow through on the promise. Let's deliver a locomotive.
Right.
So they delivered it with the 710, and so that's where all the SD90 MAC 710 powered locomotives came from.
And these are the ones that are out right now that you can still find.
Yes, the 710 powered SD90 MAC can still be found in service, plying the rails, or in storage because, of course, Union Pacific had the bulk of them. So there's still a pretty good chunk of them in storage. Norfolk Southern picked up 100 from Union Pacific. They were sort of rehabbed, gone through by Progress Rail, and then went to the Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern has rebuilt them into SD70 ACUs.
Okay, so the 90 MACs that had the 4,300 horsepower 710 engine, and this is the ones that you saw at Dupo, Kendo Patterson.
It was a nice day.
That was a nice day. So you can actually show a difference between what we have on the table versus what you saw in Dupo.
So the ones in Dupo obviously were different from the ones on the table because they
Correct.
were straight Macs. I think I did an article from Rail Model Journal back in 1997 on that Mac
Yeah.
that you're referring to.
Well, let me ask: were these the ones that were nicknamed the 9043s?
Yes. So, and that's where there's a lot of confusion with these things, and I hope that I explain this in such a way to clear a lot of this up. The 710 powered 90 Mac, like I said, that was a 4,300 horsepower locomotive. So what a lot of railroads dubbed them, and therefore rail fans dubbed them, is the SD90 43 Mac. The builder's plate on those locomotives says SD90 Mac
So from EMD.
from
Okay.
EMD.
Okay.
Whenever they got the 265H prime mover sort of worked around and started testing and producing them, that is when they added the H at the end of the designation.
Okay.
And so they became the SD90 MAC H locomotives. And the Phase 1 looks like a standard SD90 MAC with the whisper cab and the tapered hood section.
Teardrop windows on the face.
Yes.
Okay.
And they have the whisper cab has those teardrop windows, and then they tapered the engine section, and that was the main spotting feature. If it had the 265H prime mover, was it had that tapered hood section above the prime mover,
Okay.
and those were the Phase 1s. This version here is the Phase 2. If you will notice, there are a lot of features that resemble an SD70 ACE.
But this is like the grandpa to that.
True that.
Yes. So the SD70 ACE, a lot of the design aspects of it were developed on this SD90 MAC H Phase 2. Because, look at the cabs. The cabs look like what is on the SD70 ACE. Look at the radiator sections. Those huge radiator wings with only 2 fans on it. Look at the tapered rear end of the car body where the sandbox is.
We're looking at it.
and then-
That's
Yeah.
cool.
And then, look through the dynamic brake intakes in the back that has that Chicago blower style fan mounted inside, just like our SD70 ACE does. This has the same part inside the body. And so that is where, whenever I got to doing the research and we found out that the tooling from the Rail Power project was dead, it's like, well, let's just expand it
Yeah.
and see what else we can get out of this thing. And looking at this thing, because, I got excited about it. It's 6,000 horsepower locomotive. It's big. It's massive. And the tractive effort. It's an AC-powered locomotive. So, they can just run it up in notch 8, and it'll sit there and grind on the rails until it takes off and not blow up a traction motor because of the AC power.
Right. So this is all new tooling. Nothing recycled on it.
Correct.
This is ground up. Everything's brand new on it except the wheels.
Correct. We had a lot of design aspects for some of it. Take the trucks, for instance.
Right.
We had the truck existing, but it was still a new mold was cut for those truck side frames.
Okay.
So the parts, all of the tooling is new.
Okay.
There are no rehashed parts from the rail power tooling. There are no parts we had lying around from an SD70 ACE. No, this baby is new from the ground up.
So let me ask you this too. Does your partiality to coal trains have had anything to do with like putting that sort of passion into this locomotive?
For whatever do you mean?
For anyone just like getting to know Matt, he has a nice collection of coal cars, and I think he needed some new power for this one.
I did. I've got about 4 coal trains started, and they're all 75 cars minimum each.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem.
One of the most amazing aspects about this locomotive, if I'm correct on this, is when they got the 6,000 horsepower, that's when the locomotive designers started thinking, the technology we've got available, maybe this isn't a race about horsepower anymore.
Correct. And see, that's a good point, Ken, because they had that mentality, and so they were trying to have fewer resources on the rails, but still be able to haul the same amount of tonnage. And so, for instance, whenever you would have 2 6,000 horsepower units to replace 3 4,400 horsepower units, sure, the horsepower is there, but what happens if one of those 6,000 horsepower units goes down on the rails? You're down to half of your horsepower, and you're stuck. You're clogging up the whole railroad.
The higher you climb, the harder you fall.
You're
Right.
describing the SP he likes to model.
So if you take that same 12,000 horsepower on your 3 4,400 units and you lose one locomotive, you've at least got enough horsepower left to limp it into a siding and let the traffic keep moving.
Got it.
And I think that was whenever a lot of the railroads and maybe even locomotive manufacturers realized, maybe it's not about horsepower anymore. Let's
Right.
sort of make this about reliability and to, if there is a problem, get it out of the way versus we're stuck.
Well, you bring up motors, you bring up engines. Let's talk a little bit with George about the engine on this thing. We kind of started this project out, and we're like, well, this one's going to be a real interesting one, because what were some of the complications about trying to find a prototype to do the regular recording and stuff?
So, and I don't mean to steal your thunder here, George, but
You were involved in the project as well, so
okay.
you feel
One of the downfalls of this particular portion of the project is there's none of them left in the U.S.
Right.
265H prime movers, if there are any squirreled away in some back shop somewhere in Mount Vernon, Illinois, or Silvis, Illinois somewhere, I'm sure they're seized up. So doing what we could, we're looking, I'm turning over every rock, kicking over every pebble. The railroads had them. Some barge companies down Louisiana had them. A few of these things went to Australia, and then
I was trying to get that trip to Australia.
I was trying to get it too. And then some of them went over to China. And so in the Chinese National Railway, they're in some locomotives over there. Well, as we know, they weren't that successful in the United States. And so they just became paperweights, and they were all cut up. They were all scrapped.
Got it.
So there were no more prime movers in the U.S. to go send our friends at SoundTraxx out with a boom mic and a couple of people and other recording devices to fire one up and get a recording of this thing. And so, we got to talking, and luckily, scouring YouTube, I found very few clips, but I found some
Yeah.
that I submitted to SoundTraxx, and they said, we think we can work with this.
So the recordings, they weren't great to work with.
I said think.
They're well, that's very true. And when we're trying to make a decoder, we want to make sure we have quality audio.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to make sure that when we get the recording, it's going to come out as clean as we all want it to. We want to be able to hear the differences. We want to be able to hear the uniqueness of those prime movers. And with the raw recordings, we just weren't able to work with that. And so we had to kind of come in and work with some magic and
Right.
some really extensive audio work to try to get some files that we can use that will give us the quality. And we worked back and forth. We sent a couple of submissions and let you guys listen to it and compare it. And we had to go back a couple of times and try to change it up a little bit. But I think we're really happy with where we're at right now, being able to take what we had and be able to make this representation.
So speaking of that, George, could you just fire up this FMG
Sure.
that's on the table so we can kind of like audition it real quick?
Sure. So I've got right now it's muted. I'll turn it on here. So we're going to fire up the prime mover. So it is a 4-cycle engine.
Right.
And so you're going to hear it's going to sound very similar to a GE because those are 4-cycle engines, but this is very unique. And there is a turbocharger on it, and so we kind of had to go in and work with that a little bit.
Right.
And try to
Twin turbo. That's
Twin
how
turbo.
The 6,000 horsepower was sort of developed, was with the twin turbo, and that's why you see the dual exhaust ports on the top of the car body to denote the twin turbo.
So that's what that means.
Yes, on
Interesting.
the EMD locomotives, and heck, even the AC 6000s for that matter from GE, they had the dual exhaust ports. One was
Right.
per turbo.
Cool. Had no idea.
And the phase ones, the neat thing about those was when they were the very first iteration of the phase ones, those exhaust ports were offset.
Interesting.
I think I vaguely remember seeing that before, wondering what was going on there.
Right. Huh.
I didn't remember that until you just said that.
So speaking of the FMG, what's the backstory on this railroad? What is the FMG? What does that stand for?
FMG stands for Fortescue Metals Group, and it is an ore mining operation in the outback of Australia.
Okay.
And the history on these guys is when the operation first got started, they were so hungry for power, they called up the U.S. and said, "What do you got? If it rolls and runs, we'll take it." And I believe at this time, the remaining MAC H Phase 2s were back at Progress Rail,
Right.
stored in various locations, and I'm sure they called Progress and said, "Hey, send us something, and we need it to be strong. We need to have horsepower to pull these ore trains."
Right.
And so these were available. They're ultimately, from the research I have found, I know that they got 9 of these things. But in the beginning, they were so hungry for the power, they said, "Send it, we want it, we need it now."
Okay.
So they shipped 4 of the Union Pacific 90 MAC H Phase 2s, still in UP paint, over to Australia.
Uh-huh.
They got delivered to the FMG shops. FMG repainted them, put them on the rails with the 265H prime mover.
Now, these are the ones that I saw like a photo of. I think they were on a flatbed in the outback being transported. It was like, I don't know, like a 30-wheeler underneath
Right.
it. It was just this gigantic trailer with this gigantic locomotive on it. I
Right.
keep telling Ken.
Let's build it.
Yeah.
That would be a great shot.
Right. And so those first 4 locomotives were numbered 901 through 904.
Okay.
And so that is what we have replicated on this first announcement, are the first 4 that still had that 265H prime mover.
Okay.
There are some nuances between these 4 and the 5 that were rebuilt at the Juniata locomotive shops up in Pennsylvania. Those were rebuilt here in the States, rebuilt, repainted, overhauled, and they had the EMD 2-stroke 710 prime mover put in them, and they changed the exhaust ports, as we were talking about
Right.
a minute ago, to a single exhaust port. And there were some other differences. You know, they had anti-skid on the roof. They had some different logos on the nose. They had the Radio Wave AC logo on the side of the
Got it.
cab. So you'll see that these units don't have that,
Right.
because the research that I have compiled, these units didn't get those little nuances. And so that is why these are different than those, and that's what we've recreated. And so we still have the 265H prime mover sound in these
Okay.
models, as it's supposed to be, because that was what was still in it. And that's the neat thing about the Tsunami 2 is if a modeler wanted to replicate number 901, but, you know, I want to do it when it
Yeah.
had the 710 in it. Hey,
Right.
we can change a CV, and we can make it sound like a 710.
That's correct. We can
Yeah.
just simply change a CV and it'll change which prime mover plays. And on that decoder, we'll have the 710 on there as an option.
Okay.
So we can simply do this really quickly here.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see this.
So we can go in here and on the main line,
Okay.
so now you're hearing that different prime mover starting up.
Right. No, that's really cool. So it's kind of like if a modeler wants to cross-pollinate to post the re-engine, they can just do that with the switch. I mean, granted, there might be some detail differences, on the roof, but if that doesn't matter to them,
Right.
They just want to run it like as a 710 versus like a 265H. They can just do that with one CV change. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so all of those are changeable. You just simply make a CV adjustment. You can do it on the main line. You can do it on the programming track. So we'll go ahead and put this one back to the 265H,
Okay.
and we'll get it fired back up. And then now you'll be able to hear that 265H again.
Sweet.
Yeah. And,
We did that in what, 15 seconds, if that?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
the single CV change is pretty straightforward. You know,
Right.
if you can program an address, it's something.
Right. And this 265H prime mover is going to be on the Athearn decoder that we lump our 710 prime movers with. So you'll have the 710 prime movers that SoundTraxx offers, and then this one will be on top of that on the Athearn decoder.
Right.
And just want to point out, and I'm going to go ahead and mute this guy here, but I just want to point out that the Athearn decoders that we build are full-feature Tsunami 2s.
Right.
The only differences between an Athearn factory-installed Tsunami 2 and an aftermarket Tsunami 2 is they've chosen different default values because they're modeling a specific model. And so when they go through, they pick the air horn, they pick the prime mover, the lighting effects, and so forth, which is another cool thing we'll talk about.
Okay.
And then the other difference is we've talked about, their sound selection are going to be a little different because they're modeling a specific locomotive. And so you're going to get prime movers that are related to that locomotive. And so instead of on this SD90, you don't need an EMD 567 prime mover sound.
Right.
So we don't put that on there for you. We just give you in this case, the 265 and the 710s.
You know, these are some of the things that are so hard to kind of convey with just, text sometimes. And it's really important just to get this out there. One of the things that we're rolling into these locomotives is also a new level of Genesis called Genesis 2.0. What are some of the key features internally to Genesis 2.0, Matt?
Internally, of course, we've got our Tsunami 2. We are updating everything as to the best of our ability with LEDs.
Yes.
We have found a solution for existing models to have LEDs inserted into them, and new product going forward has LEDs in them. And along with those LED changes, we are putting ground effect lights where appropriate. We are lighting the number boards whenever possible. And then, of course, you've got your standard other lighting features, ditch lights, headlights, and things of that nature. And some of the other lighting features we're trying to implement will be forthcoming, and we'll have to wait and see.
Well, let's not forget, too, the dual Sugarcube speaker, because that's a major differentiating point between earlier Genesis models and this one.
It is. This is something we have talked to our friends at SoundTraxx once again,
Right.
Gotten their input, and, everybody has sort of heard of the Sugarcube craze that happened a couple years ago, and, talking to SoundTraxx, George, Nancy, and everybody at their shop,
Right.
you really ought to look into these Sugarcubes and see if you can put them in your models. And so we developed a speaker enclosure that houses the two speakers, wires them in a series, and you still only have two wires coming off of it that plugs into the positive and the negative terminals on your decoder, motherboard, what have you. And you've got this awesome sound coming from these locomotives. I still am blown away by it. You get that chug from a GE or the chug out of this 265H sound bite. Even the 567, which unfortunately I haven't been able to update a model with the dual Sugarcubes that uses a 567 yet. But whenever I can turn up the volume on that 567 with the dual Sugarcubes, and I can hear the suction of the intake of the air of the piston, it's like, that is sweet. Well, like I said, I'm an engine dork.
Well, let me fill in a little bit, because those cube speakers that you guys are using, the frequency range is amazing on them, and they reproduce a low frequency compared to some of the bigger traditional speakers that we've been using in the past for our models. And what's really cool about them is with our Tsunami 2, we give you the full sound spectrum. We don't filter out anything low. You get the whole thing. So if you were to hook this up to a bookshelf speaker, you're going to feel like you're standing next to the real locomotive. And so by doing that, you're getting the full spectrum. So you
Right.
can adjust that. And with our 7-band equalizer, it gives you the ability to customize the way that sound is played through those speakers to maximize its strengths and minimize its weaknesses. And so those low frequencies that the speaker can do, you can boost that up and help get that low frequency. I'll tell you that one of the first times I'd finally become a mini cube speaker or a cube speaker convert, if you will, we had put 4 of those into a model. And I know a lot of you guys are going to say that's overkill. Yes. And it sounded awesome.
Worth it.
And that was one of the first times I really almost felt like I could feel that low end energy coming out of
Right.
that model. And it was fantastic. And that was one of the things that made me proud that we do that is, we give you that sound spectrum. So if you have the capability of getting that sound out, you're going to get it out of our decoder.
Well, it's that whole Tsunami 2 Spinal Tap reference. You got to turn it up to 11.
Yes.
And that's when you start, wiring these things in a series. You can do that, and you get the full spectrum out of it. And I'll tell you what, the audio, the difference between like a cone speaker and these new Sugarcube speakers is like night and day.
It's amazing. I mean, for years we've always been preaching that, bigger is better.
Yeah.
And now we can actually do that with these mini cube speakers or the Sugarcubes, and we're getting a good quality sound out of a much smaller package. So it's actually great.
I mean, Ken, what do you think? You've
I
heard
saw
a
you
lot of
experimenting with the Sugarcube speaker 6 months ago. I knew you were thinking about it. You were onto it because you've been testing it in a lot of your different locomotives, Chris, and you brought them over here. And in fact, people don't know it, but on one of the What's Neat segues that I ran, I think it was last month and the month before, it was your run by that you did with those speakers in the thing. It was cool.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, you've
I'm
been
sorry,
caught.
I can't remember.
So they do their pre-testing on this layout, and they've been studying these things for 6 months, and they're sold. They work. They do give you a robust bass sound.
Well, and I'll tell you, if you all have any questions, what are the Sugarcube speakers coming out in? Well, our SD40T-2s that we just delivered a couple, 6 to 8 weeks ago, something like that.
Yep.
That was the first model, I believe, to come with the Sugarcube speakers. We had originally redone the chassis and underframe on that guy, reversed that drive gear, so you've got a 98% see-through radiator intake section on those iconic, noticeable tunnel motors. But right above there are those twin cube speakers.
Yeah.
And then the SD40-2s that are forthcoming have twin cube speakers in them.
Wow.
So it's a rollout that is in the works for sure.
Awesome. So that's going to be kind of something new for the entire line moving forward eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
It all takes time, but diligently working on them because I'm excited about it.
Well, guys, we're going to kind of bring this to a wrap, but if you have any questions, feel free to post them here. We'll be checking them out. I know Ken will be trying to respond to as many as he can, and I know myself and maybe Matt too. George is always kind of keeping a tabs on things as well. So, but hey, thanks everybody for watching, and please comment, like, and subscribe to Mr.
Yes,
Ken Patterson.
We got to start getting people to subscribe to the What's Neat This Week YouTube site. I never pay attention to subscribe, but now you guys have got me doing it. So let's up those numbers. And we got tons of views. We love all our viewers.
Damn.
This is great, guys. You haven't heard me so quiet on a show ever because you guys really did a great job of explaining these beautiful works of art.
Yeah. Well, comment, like, subscribe, but more importantly, get your pre-orders in for these models, guys.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
It's not one of those things that, it'll be there in 6 months.
Yeah.
These guys are getting quite a bit of buzz. I think people are excited about them, and when they hit the streets, I think people are going to gobble them up. So get your pre-order in.
And I'll do a real quick shameless plug. If you guys want to learn about the Tsunami 2, you can always like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, and you can see all the cool things you can do with the Tsunami 2 decoder.
Don't you do like online classes too?
We are doing webinars as well and trying to get into it. Actually, our month of April is going to be overview of a decoder installation, so that'll be good. So be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get updates on when that's coming, and you can sign up and subscribe.
Yeah, subscribing just helps keep you informed to whenever there's like a 0.5 podcast from Mr. Kendo Patterson, and also to, when George does a new class or, just a quick hint. it'll be there when you need it.
God, guys, this is the best hobby in the world, and I want to go run these 2 trains. Thank you very much, Joshua Sugarfire, for running camera for us tonight. We love you. Daniel's in the room tonight, too. Daniel, we love you. Chris Palomarez, God, rock and roll, George Bogatiuk, and God, I love you, Matt. Matt, your knowledge is amazing.
Thanks.
So, rock and roll, guys. Am I closing out show number 70.5?
It sounds like a radio station.
70.
WNTW.
WNTW, the voice of model railroading, is closing in and out, guys. Best hobby in the world. Let's go run some trains.
Let's do it.